So imagine this. You get married to a man, but he ends up sleeping with half of his staff. He is cheating on you. He's absent from the house. You guys end up divorcing and you stay alone for a year. After this, you take out a will that he is not included on. And a few months later, he comes back into your life, sweeps you off your feet, and you guys get remarried, and 12 days later, you're dead. And this man gets everything. And somehow your own death was blamed on you. This is what happened for Elsa Lemp Wright back in the 1920s. And not only her, but 3 other members of her family died in the same manner. But Elsa's is by far the most suspicious. So let's get into her backstory and then talk about some of the red flags. Elsa was born in 1883, and she was the last of the Lemp children. The family that she was born into was the famous Lemp brewing family of St. Louis. Like I'm telling y'all, these guys made bank. And I will include all of their backstories on my YouTube. But Elsa was always the baby of the family. And while she was very spoiled, she became an independent, resilient young woman. So how did Elsa end up the most wealthiest unmarried woman in St. Louis at the time? Well, she was only 23 when her mother passed away of cancer in 1906. So their family's entire estate was divided among the children when she passed away. And it was said on the will that Elsa could receive an extra $100,000 whenever she married. Well, Elsa was a baddie and a feminist, and she joined the suffrage movement in the 1910s and became the founder of the first suffragette society in St. Louis. She was fascinated with spiritualism and just an overall free thinker. Well, she ended up meeting a man named Thomas Wright. He was the president of this brass and metal company, so the wedding was bougie and they took a year-long honeymoon, essentially traveling the world. And Elsa brought 28 pieces of Louis Vuitton luggage with her. But once they got back home and reality set in, their personalities did not mix well together and it turned into a freaking storm. They had screaming matches that often turned violent. He would cheat on her constantly. For one of the many examples, whenever he caught her in bed with one of his workers, she took her car and rammed it into his. On February 1st of 1919, Elsa filed for divorce. And it was granted. And for the next year, Elsa decided to find herself again. She was traveling, spending time with friends, family, but at some point reconnected with Thomas. This man somehow won her back, and on March 8th of 1920, they were remarried in New York City. And just a few days later, on March 20th, she was found dead. While her last days remain a mystery, the only version of events that exists belongs to her husband, who is highly suspicious. Either way, according to him, the night of March 19th was restless for Elsa. She was having indigestion, nausea, and periods of severe depression. It was thought that maybe she was having stress after remarrying Thomas, possibly having second thoughts about the reconciliation. Whatever was causing her suffering, she was awake for most of the night. Thomas claimed that she woke the next morning and was feeling better, but wanted to remain in bed. Moments later, he got out of bed to take a bath, and he heard a sharp cracking sound over the noise of the water. He called for her and didn't hear her. Let's talk about some of the red flags involving Elsa's death. There was no witnesses, and none of the workers there heard anything. They were shocked that there was no letter or note left. The first phone call was made to a doctor, and the second call was made to a family friend who just happened to be an attorney. No one bothered to telephone the police. In fact, the police found out by accident, because her brother Edwin ended up getting into a car accident after being called by the doctor. The police were dispatched over there, and Thomas seemed highly agitated. His only excuse for not calling them himself was that he was upset and bewildered. He was questioned for about 2 hours, but never taken into custody. While there's a large family history of depression, there was no real evidence to show that she took her own life. The only witness to this was her husband, who had claimed to hear a cracking sound. There was no blood at the crime scene, and her body wasn't moved from the house following her death. The embalming was performed in-room. I am on my way to the Lemp Mansion right now, and I'm going to be staying in Elsa's room. The Lemp Mansion has high paranormal activity, so if you'd like to see that and also know more backstory on the family, go to my YouTube. So the most terrifying thing about the Sally house is that nobody really knows if it's being haunted by a ghost or a demon. The Sally house, located in Atchison, Kansas, has a lengthy history of just terrifying owners, and has also been the source of 2 separate BuzzFeed Unsolves. And I really think that we should all go there ourselves. But first, let's get into the backstory. The Sally house was built between 1867 and 1871. It was built for Michael C. Finney and his family. This included his wife Kate and his 3 kids, James, Agnes, and Charles. And altogether, they lived in the basement while this was being built. But in the year 1872, Michael ended up passing away in the home. And years later, in 1906, his daughter Agnes moved back into the home. She got married to an engineer named William True, and in 1913, he also passed away in the home. Agnes passed away next in 1939. After this, several families moved in and out of the residence, and there wasn't a whole lot of incidents. But this all changed on December 31st of 1992 when the Pickmans moved in. Tony and Deborah Pickman, who were a newlywed couple and expecting their first child, had no idea what. So when Tony and Deborah Pickman were moving into the new house, their dog, who was normally very calm, would start to freak out a lot. And to give a little bit of timeline, about January through June of 1993, they would experience things such as lights flickering, cold spots around the home, landline calls dropped, pretty typical haunting stuff. But this honestly seems just common for a home built in the 1800s. Tony had even joked about there being a ghost. Well, in June of 1993, their baby arrived. And this is when things went from a little spooky to terrifying. Electronic toys would turn on and off, the wind-up mobile above his crib would just randomly go off, and he would wake up almost every hour of the night. Deborah describing it as if someone was wanting to play with him. A neighbor actually ended up coming to them and asking them why they left their nursery light on throughout the night, when in reality, their son had just been sleeping in their bedroom, so they weren't even in there turning on the light. Deborah's sister ended up coming into town to help with the baby, and she asked why all the baby's toys were on the floor arranged in a circle with backs facing